The job of apologetics is to clear the ground, to clear obstacles that prevent people from coming to the knowledge of Christ. And if there's anything that I think has blocked the growth of Christ is the free reign of the Spirit and people accepting the Scripture and Jesus Christ, is the Darwinian naturalistic view. In a feature article in the Christian magazine Touchstone, Dembski was even more succinct. Quote, "Intelligent design is just the logos theology of John's gospel, restated in the idiom of information theory." Finally, listen to the words of Philip Johnson, the University of California, Berkeley law professor, sort of the grandfather of the modern intelligent design movement, at that same National Religious Broadcasters Convention in Anaheim. Quote, "Christians in the 20th century have been playing defense. They've been fighting a defensive war to defend what they have, to defend as much of it as they can. It never turns the tide. What we're trying to do is something entirely different. We're trying to go into enemy territory, their very center, and blow up the ammunition dump." What is their ammunition dump in this metaphor? It is their version of creation, close quote. Finally, Johnson was even blunter in 1996. He said, quote, "This isn't really, and never has been, a debate about science. It's about religion and philosophy." So I just wanted to put that out on the table so that we're clear what we're really talking about tonight, just in case it isn't obvious. Now, of course, this is something called the genetic fallacy, like somehow I've just dismissed their science, and no, I haven't. But I just want to be clear about what actually I think is going on here tonight. After all, Francis Collins, who's was the head of the Human Genome Project, now the head of the National Institutes of Health, he believes everything these gentlemen believe about the Christian religion, and he does perfectly good science. So what's the difference here? Francis Collins fully accepts all of evolutionary theory. He even conceded to me last week that he now largely accepts my own evolutionary theory on the origins of morality, that you don't even need an outside source for that God could have built into the system through evolution a development of a moral sense of right and wrong. So let me now turn to what I think are the actual flaws, regardless of what the religious agenda may be. I think there's only two explanations to answer the question of what's the origins of life or the diversity of life. One, science. Two, everything else. Within science, we're talking about natural explanations, bottom-up natural explanations for X, whatever X is, the origins of life, the evolution of life, the eye, the wing, whatever, solar system, the planets. And two, under everything else is, well, what? Well, you can hear that from their side tonight. But I would include in that supernatural explanations. That is, these are what we call God of the gaps arguments. In science, we have a certain assumption. It's called methodological naturalism. That is, we assume that there are natural explanations for natural phenomenon. Every argument from the intelligent design theory side sounds something like this. X looks designed. I can't think of how X was designed naturally. Therefore, X was designed supernaturally. It doesn't matter what the X is. You can fill in the blank. They'll have some new examples tonight. It used to be the wing. Then it was the eye. Then it was the bacterial flagellum. And now it's DNA. It's getting smaller and more molecular in size. But the X is still the X in principle. Now, I'm willing to concede the word design. Things are designed. Wings are designed to fly. Eyes are designed to see. The question is, who or what is the designer? Darwin gave us an explanation of how design comes about naturally from the bottom up. Now, it's possible that that's not the full explanation. Perhaps there's some built-in, self-organized, emergent properties that are still to be discovered. Something along the lines of what Stu Kaufman and some complexity theorists and chaos theorists study when they study complex systems. But they're not invoking any supernatural forces there. They're still talking about bottom-up natural forces. So, for example, on page 443 of Stephen's new book, He says theories, especially origins theories, needn't be either scientific or religious. They might be both. Or more precisely, some scientific theories, although not themselves religious, might have philosophical or religious implications. True. But that isn't the point. That's not the problem. Stephen, the problem is not that you're religious or you're Christian or whatever. That's irrelevant. As I said, Francis Collins is, and he still does good science. The problem is that by invoking something that is by definition not testable, there's no experiment we can run, you're now off the page of science. So by invoking some kind of extra-natural, supernatural, supranatural, paranatural, something beyond the natural, there's nothing we can do with that. It's kind of a conversation stopper. It ends the discussion. You quote, Stephen, the great Isaac Newton in his invocation of the deity to explain what keeps the planets going. Why does nobody invoke that argument in astronomy and cosmology? Nobody does. They cite the great Isaac Newton where he was doing science, but where Isaac Newton abandoned his science and said, well, you know what, I can't think of how gravity could explain the overall origins of the solar system. I think that is where the divinity came in. Nobody invokes Newton for that. And it's not because Newton was religious, and you're not supposed to be religious. Lots of scientists are religious. It is that he wasn't doing science. And once you're off the page of science, then you've taken yourself out of the discussion. Thank you.
All right, I'm the second part of this tag team here. I'm the scientist in charge of the other half of it. And I'm going to talk strictly about scientific approaches in most of this talk, not about the metaphysical as much. My book is out on the table there. Most of this is a very short version of what you can find at length in the book if you want to read more. And as Michael just said, we're talking about testable hypotheses that must be addressed in a way where we're willing to throw out our established, cherished notions if the evidence is against it. And that's the way we test hypotheses in science all the time. And as Michael just said, and I'll repeat because it's important, we cannot resort to supernatural explanations. It's not because we're anti-religious. As Michael pointed out, about 50% of my colleagues are religious as well. It's because religious ideas are simply not testable. There's no way to say God did it and then find a test that works, or the intelligent designer did it, or whatever. There's no way to test it. A very nice little cartoon by Sidney Harris says it very clearly. Our little scientist there is working along, and then he has an equation where then a miracle occurs. As you see the other scientist saying, I think you should be more explicit here in step 2. I'll turn this so I can see it. And the question we must address here is not just does Darwinian science address the problem we're talking about tonight. The intelligent design people can't say, well, they didn't do it well enough, therefore we win. They have to actually explain how it works. That's the only way a scientist does things. They don't just say, I don't buy your explanation, therefore I win. Okay? And if they're going to talk about intelligent design, they must be willing to test the idea that if you look at the world, does it appear to be intelligent design? And there are lots and lots of examples of bad design and crummy design in nature. I'll just show you a couple of them. In your chest right now is the left recurrent laryngeal nerve, which I don't think I can point to too well, but here it is right here coming off the vagus nerve, looping under your aorta, and then way up back to your larynx. It's 3 feet longer than it needs to be. Okay? It could take the direct route right off the vagus nerve and right to your larynx. You say, well, why would an intelligent designer make that completely weird course of the nerve, which in fact it can subject you to all sorts of problems if you kicked in the solar plexus? Okay? The reason? Because that nerve is tied to a gill arch that is tied to the aorta when you enter an embryo, and when the aorta moves backwards, so does the nerve. And in fact, it's a real problem for giraffes. That nerve is 15 feet long because they have long necks, and it makes no sense whatsoever. As some of you know, in your retina right now, your light-sensing rods and cones are on the bottom layer, facing away from the light source, and they're subjected to all sorts of distortion of light from the tissues and blood vessels that sit above them. Okay, and also, as some of you know, up there in the back part of the retina, you have the ocular nerve coming out right there, which creates a blind spot. Not a very good way to design a retina. If you want to look at a well-designed eye, look at an octopus. Much better than ours, okay? Their rods and cones face forward, and they have no blind spot. Many organisms in nature have these limited function or non-function or reduced function vestigial organs that are evidence of their ancestry. For example, whales have vestigial hips and thigh bones in their bodies. Here it is on the skeleton of a whale mounted in a museum. They have no function whatsoever now. They're only evidence of four-legged whales, which of course we have fossils of now as well. The same is true of snakes, horses with 3 toes, and so on. And as Michael said, the whole idea argument is basically